1959, families in Canada were instructed by their government to store quantities of food in their houses. Canadian school children practiced taking cover under their desks. And television stations announced tests of emergency siren signals. Ordinary Canadians were asked to do these quite extraordinary things because there was a serious possibility that their lives and those of their families would be threatened by a massive nuclear attack on North America. The Cold War was at its most intense, and potential nuclear devastation was lurking in the wings. In the early 60s, when the Cold War was in one of its most dangerous phases, well-known CBC announcers actually produced the attack warning message tapes that would have been broadcast over the emergency broadcasting system in the event of an attack on Canada. What is the Cold War? Winston Churchill first coined the term in 1949. It refers to a state of hostilities between nations just short of actual combat. The development of huge stores of weapon systems, including weapons of mass destruction such as nuclear bombs, the creation of large standing military forces as part of even larger alliances, intense surveillance and spying by the antagonists, saber-rattling and brinkmanship. These were all characteristics of the Cold War. The Cold War lasted from 1945 to 1989. The Soviet Union had been an uneasy partner of the United States, Britain, Canada, and during the Second World War. However, toward the end of the war, with the imminent defeat of Nazi Germany, these nations' interests in the future fate of post-war Europe, and soon after the world, began to dramatically diverge. The United States President Truman, Britain's Prime Minister Churchill, and the Soviets' Chairman Stalin agreed to split Europe into eastern and western zones. What made the Cold War very different from the hot wars that had preceded it was the existence of nuclear weapons and the very real threat that they would be used in future conflicts. These weapons of mass destruction, developed and employed in war for the first time by the United States against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, had demonstrated their horrifically devastating effects. Subsequent development of more powerful atomic weapons, including hydrogen bombs and warheads, along with bombers and later suborbital missiles to deliver these weapons, cast a doomsday shadow across the globe. On March 5, 1946, Churchill gave a speech at Fulton College, Missouri, where he stated that, quote, "An iron curtain has descended in Europe," unquote. This Iron Curtain divided the world into two armed camps, West and East. The West was centered on the United States and its North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies. The East included the Soviet Union, and its partners included East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. They formed the Warsaw Pact in 1955. From that point on, the lines were drawn on the map of Europe, and the East-West confrontation that was to threaten the survival of humanity for the next 3.5 decades was underway. Civilization, even the very existence of all life on Earth, would be threatened by the use of nuclear weapons. There was widespread fear that some international event or situation could at any time trigger the outbreak of a Third World War. Many events increased the tension, at times coming very close to the brink of such a war. The Berlin blockade, conflicts in Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Afghanistan, attempted revolutions in Hungary, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, the construction of the Berlin Wall, incidents such as the Cuban Missile Crisis and the U-2 spy plane downing, and strife in Africa and Central America are simply examples. Canada found itself geographically located between the two principal superpowers. Over the North Polar regions is the shortest distance between the United States and the Soviet Union. The federal government and many Canadians were rightfully concerned that a war between the superpowers would end up destroying Canada. In response, throughout the Cold War period, most nations, including Canada, created programs to provide for some protection for their civilian population. Canada had rudimentary plans for civil defense, and in a few aspects had developed a useful capacity to protect some of its citizens in the event of nuclear war. However, the federal government was reluctant to spend the money needed, and a general lack of interest on behalf of most provinces and much of the population to participate meant that little significant progress was made. The federal government did publish a number of useful booklets designed to help the public take measures to protect itself. They also had installed a nationwide system of attack warning sirens and developed the CBC radio-based emergency broadcast systems to warn and advise the public in case of attack. The federal government also encouraged families to build fallout shelters in the basements of their homes. Later, they identified but did not equip millions of spaces in the basements of large buildings for use as community fallout shelters. However, such plans were largely incomplete and were neither adequately implemented nor maintained. In the 60s, the Canadian government had also secretly built a system of strong concrete and steel underground structures to protect thousands of key national officials. These were intended to enable the continued functioning of a minimum of legitimate government, no matter what happened. The collapse of the Soviet Union was likely caused by many complex factors. Its fall is illustrated by the fall of the Berlin Wall. Despite both Russia and the United States having significantly reduced their stocks of nuclear weapons systems, great numbers of such weapons remain not only in those two countries, but also around the globe. Whether the lessons of what could be called the First Cold War have been learned by the world remains to be seen. You are now about to tour a place that was kept secret from Canadians for the first 20 years of its existence. The Diefenbunker has been acquired by a small group of volunteers and now is being operated as a non-profit museum of the Cold War. During your visit, we ask you to think about what could have happened to the world, to Canadians, and to the families of those who would have had to come to this place to try and maintain a thin line of continuity of government, if ever the sirens had sounded, signaling the start of a real nuclear attack.